All right, so welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining
Mhm.
us today. Today we're going to be talking about the hidden truths of ingredient preferences, and we're going to be talking about implicit testing within that scope and talking about how that's really helping uncover new pieces of information that we really are just discovering are much, much more valuable for the market. With us today, we've got myself, I'm Greg Stucky, Chief Research Officer at InsightsNow, Dave Lundahl,
Hey,
and CEO of InsightsNow, and our wonderful guest, Mimi Sherlock, who's the VP of Consumer Intelligence for Nourish at IFF.
Wow.
And long time brain thinking collaborator for us as
yeah,
well, right? So
really excited about this
amazing.
conversation today. Should be really
Me
good.
too.
So as we go through today, there is Q&A. If you are familiar with Zoom or not familiar with Zoom, you'll notice these buttons on your screen. You can pop into the Q&A or into the chat and throw information to us. As we're going through, today is very conversational, so I'm going to be monitoring those as closely as possible. And if you've got a question, throw it up in real time so I can try and integrate that into the conversation. All right.
Great.
So today we're going to be talking about three big areas. We're going to be talking about ingredients and their impact on consumer choices and behavior. We're going to be talking about advances in ingredient testing, and then we're going to talk about how is that applied to business. What are some of the learnings we're gathering over these past few years about understanding ingredients and how we work with consumers and ingredients. All right, so we are going to get kicked off with ingredient impact on behavior. And Dave, I'd like for you to
Mhm.
kick us off on this topic. What do
Sure.
we know about the impact of ingredients on people's behavior?
Yeah, so we live in really interesting times. A time when social media is a platform for influencers to have, a bigger voice than brand owners and scientists and those in the government that are, entrusted to keep our food system safe, to keep our CPG non-food products safe. Last year, we've seen incredible changes for how consumers think and react into ingredients. Consumer trust has certainly eroded. And I think the rhetoric on social media is correlated with that, is definitely a cause and effect. The emotional hype on social media by influencers and various media channels and news groups, is much more engaging than the more rationality of scientists, and even brand presentations, brand owners or people in the government, so negative content about ingredients, and this whole thing about real food versus ultra processed foods, has been creeping into the implicit memories of people. So they're much more likely to react negatively now, very fast, very implicit fast to some ingredients on labels. And react behaviorally, in making their food choices, So irrespective of whether products are ingredients are grass, in about 2016, we started to see this creation of no-no lists by some retailers in response to this change we're seeing in consumers demanding that products on their shelves be more clean label. So today there is much more greater need for ingredient testing to be able to understand these reactions, these implicit reactions that consumers are having, and so that those that are developing new products, brand owners, food products, non-food companies as well, um, and ingredient suppliers, like Mimi is representing at
Yep.
IFF, when they bring out new ingredients to meet the demands of consumers, ingredient testing is more important than ever. So that's kind of my sort of initial thoughts to kick off here.
Hey,
Well,
hey, Dave, I was also just thinking while you were saying that, when we think about this topic of just ingredient impact on actual behavior, I was recently doing some work in the weight management space, And it was just fascinating because I took a look through the last 25 years of what's been going on in that space, and the way consumers have been changing their behavior over the last 25 years based on the idea that, you think about, fat, 25 years ago was the villain in weight management. Then protein started becoming, much more of a hero. 25 years ago, no one had much of a reaction about fiber at all. It was kind of neutral. People didn't even think about it. But now fiber is one of the, I guess, highest recognized ingredient category when people think about something that's going to help them with their weight loss. So just in that context alone, over the last few years, you have seen things go from neutral to hero, and from hero to villain back to neutral, and every little mix in between when you think about carbs and fat and fiber. And so I just think that's kind of one way that probably most of us can relate to. Many of us have at some point tried to eat healthier, or maybe lose weight, and we hear all these different stories about these different types of ingredients, and it becomes really confusing because we have associations depending on what we're hearing and what we're experiencing, and sometimes it gets really confusing out there. So just something that kind of, I think, resonates with a lot of people around how powerful these associations can be in actually changing what you want to eat and how you want to eat.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking about the same thing. Like when I travel, I see you go country to country, and all of a sudden what they're talking about, the ingredients that they're making a big deal about, change, right?
Yeah.
And there's things that you suddenly show up in a location, you're like, wow, this is it's a really different attitude about certain types of ingredients and certain types of processing. And so I think it's not just that it's like this big push globally to go, hey, fat's bad, if fiber's good. It's actually because of the impact of influencers today. It's hyper localized. Many of the influencers are local today. So you add that in, and our behaviors are shifting, and what you might do in one location might not be what you do in the other, but just because of the media pressure that you have in your life or allow in your life. Yeah. So with all of that, so as we're thinking about that, with that history and that understanding that all of those things are driving behavior, what does that mean in terms of testing with consumers, like what consumers do and don't want?
Yep. Well, I'll jump in first. We've learned for a long time that you can't just ask overtly, how much you like this ingredient or dislike it or whatever. That's not really behavioral. It doesn't get to, whether people will actually avoid a product or even the other way, be attracted to an ingredient, I should say, not a product, but an ingredient. So you have to be able to understand and develop metrics that help overcome the problem that people, what they say is not what they do. Okay. And so that creates that is definitely one of the challenges. And so you need more behavioral metrics that sort of align and have highly correlated with people's behavioral tendencies to gravitate away from something or towards something. And then because ingredients can be, and this is the second point I want to make, is it may not be just avoidance, like ingredient, like the villain, as Mimi put it, but the hero. Hero ingredients is someone who's really interested in health and wellness, or a specific type of health and wellness, or beauty, or something like that. Ingredients definitely can be a hero, as well as perhaps if they're interested in sustainability, that's important to them. Ingredients that come from sustainable sources can be definitely something you put onto a claim statement, or something that's an implied claim where you can't make a statement that a claim, but the fact that you highlight this ingredient, people know because of what they've learned in social media and the sources they've read, that this is going to be good for them in some way, or good for the environment.
Yeah. It seems like one of the other challenges is, I know for us at IFF, we deal with a lot of different types of ingredients, but we also deal in several different categories. We do work in baked goods, we do work in beverages, we do work in salty snacks, we do work in alcohol, non-alcohol. And I think, depending on what a person's, maybe you call it the moment, or why they're reaching for a product at a certain moment, you know, they can make different decisions, and they might feel different about the same ingredient,
Yeah.
in a different moment where,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm buying the soup for my family because I want to nourish them as a lunch option, or I'm buying these Skittles for my family because they want a treat, right? So the same ingredient, is perceived very differently. And I guess, it's those trade-offs your people are willing to make. So it gets kind of hard just to say, is this ingredient good or not?
Right.
It's more complex than that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Being something clean label, like a yogurt, has to be very clean label. But you could other products are just other dairy products for that matter, don't necessarily have to be so clean label, just because of the context,
Yeah.
and or the use case, as you say. I think this great point.
Mhm.
I think that's the context piece was probably one of my most surprising findings many years ago, where, when we were looking at stevia coming out, and we had when stevia first came out, there was a lot of fear in what is this? What's this new brand? What does this really do? And you put concepts with stevia and yogurt, and people were like, I don't know about that. But you put stevia in a protein shake, and they're like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. So it really, really contextually, not just for products, but what those products were
Yeah.
supposed to do for you, really changed people's opinions. And then over time that shifted and changed. And if you didn't monitor that over time, you would have, forever thought that stevia and yogurt was a bad idea, when
Yeah,
it
we did some
actually
work with
very could
almonds,
be.
for
Oh,
the
right. Yeah.
almond board of California once, and we found that context mattered so much. In some context, almonds meant flavor. In other contexts, it meant high protein.
Yeah.
Very, very different sort of meaning attached to that in the different context.
Right. Right. Yep.
Yep. So,
Yeah.
yep.
That was really good. So a lot of that history, right, of seeing all those contextual problems and everything like that, that's where, Dave, you
Yep.
were asked, early, late 2000, I don't know what time frame it was, but you were
Yeah.
asked to actually, let's go and figure out how to solve
Yeah.
this problem.
Yeah. There was a group of people from the food industry. These are leaders in the food industry. Noel Anderson, who's now past president of IFT. He was former global head of R&D for PepsiCo at the time. Phil Perkins, some of you may know him. He was a senior vice president of R&D and innovation for Bush Brothers. Those two and several others, they approached InsightsNow, approached me to help them understand. At the time, this is like 2017, when you had Food Babe and some of these influencers were starting to really have impact. And, what can we do this? What can we do about it? How do we address this? Because all we know is to try to be scientists and bring out this sort of voicing. And so we developed at that time, to overcome these challenges that we just discussed here, we started developing a methodology that eventually was called the Explicit Test. And it's been really effective to try to overcome these challenges, to overcome the gap between what people say and what they actually do. And this fact that sometimes you could have an ingredient being implicitly associated with something that's a benefit, and other times it's a villain. People will avoid it, and then context. So it addresses all of those things.
Right, right. Yeah, and I remember, when we first got into this, putting on my build a methodology and science hat or a new tool, when we first started, we'd been, our gut reaction was, okay, hey, this is bias thinking, right? There's behavioral bias, associative bias, so let's jump into implicit, association testing methodologies. And we'd been doing implicit, like the traditional testing for many years. But as we started looking into it, we started seeing some really strange patterns in the data that just would not make sense. Like I remember, like honey as an example, as an ingredient was, if you look at it kind of back picture, it was fantastic. But then as you started slicing the data, all of a sudden you'd be like, well, why is it like getting weird? It's going from a highly associative implicit metric or ingredient to one that's not. And just as I looked at different cohorts of people, and that made us go, well, wait, do we really trust this information? Do we trust this data? Is speed of response really giving us what we need to learn? And what we found out and through our research was that the problem was we were thinking about the problem big picture. We were trying to think about it as what's the pattern in the industry, rather than asking ourselves, for that one specific individual, what do they believe? How are they reacting? What's in that individual person's mind?
Yeah.
And so what we had to do is get to that individual person level in the methodology. So we created what is now the implicit explicit test to get a calibration done for that individual in that context, because context changes things, right? Speed of responses changes based on, potentially your device, whether you've had your coffee or not, right? All those situational contexts come into play. So you couldn't just generalize it. You couldn't average it, right? That was the problem. Looking at averages and generalizations was getting us nowhere. Once we were able to then individualize it, then all of a sudden it made sense, because now we could actually look at it from a market perspective, right? I could say, oh, X% of people have this association in their brain. Oh, wow, now I know how to size things. Now I know how big of a bias exists out there, how many people have that bias. That's a very different answer than, is there generally more of a bias this way or that way? So that was a really big aha for us in coming up with this, is just how we framed the problem, right? It's you can't just go out there and say high fructose corn syrup is bad. It's not really true. There's a lot of very successful products with high fructose corn syrup in them. So you just can't generalize it. You've got to be able to get to the human level for everything.
Right?
Yeah, it's kind of, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I think about kind of the origins of this methodology, because I think I was learning about it pretty quickly after you guys created it. And I think prior to that, what was really starting to become popular were companies that were doing a lot more testing using like biosensors, like galvanic skin response and brain waves, and those more I don't know, super types of sensors that were really trying to measure things, obviously just truly going on in your brain, and doing that alone. And it's interesting because, I know that some of that work is still going on, but I think this kind of next step of these little bit more sophistication and combining of different, individual techniques is something I've seen that really makes this, to me, seem much more, I trust it a little bit more. It makes more sense to me. I think it, just because I've been using this data for quite a long time, I really trust this methodology quite a bit.
Well, the other thing that we were excited about by this particular approach is the it's a tool, right? Like any other
Yeah.
tool, and you can apply it in a lot of different ways. So you can look at it for assessing biases, but a lot of times what we're focusing on is associations, right? Or behavioral impact in different areas. So if you think of associations, like if I say vitamin A, you're going to think eyesight. If I say calcium, you're going to say bones, right? If I put on the package that vitamin A was good for your bones, that would be kind of disruptive to you. And there's going to be a bunch of people that are like, no way, I don't think that's true. And a bunch of people who are going, oh, maybe that is true. Maybe I don't know. Those types of associations can help you in industry. And I was thinking about this because Lauren, you just from the audience, right? Lawrence said, hey, it's an interesting graphic because nutrition facts label and ingredient list are two different labeling elements. And, fiber, which we were talking about earlier, is, a nutrient which you can add, but it's also part of your nutrition facts label, which comes from things that, different aspects of the product. And I think that's kind of the value when you start getting into understanding, well, what are people reacting to and how do we want them to react? Because you're right, like reacting to fat versus reacting to a specific oil that's in the formula are two very different things. And if from a human behavior standpoint, you can use this methodology to look at percentages of people who are going to be impacted by different elements in different ways. Maybe they aren't impacted by the ingredient, but maybe they are impacted by the fat content.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So what we haven't talked about system 1 versus system 2. And I just want to bring that into the conversation because for those that maybe have never seen this methodology, but what it does is allows for determining for that person in that context whether the reaction to a dichotomous response, yes, no, okay, avoid, or whatever, to some, like an ingredient, is, it could be an associative type of response or just, an avoidance response. But was that done with a system 1, very fast thinking mind, which means there's implicit memories, that
strong associations
that made that have been crept into their heads or their minds, over their experiences. Or system 2, it means they have a rationality. It could be a disruption, right? That doesn't make sense. You've got to think about that, right?
Right.
So before you make the response,
slowness, right?
Yeah. And so what this methodology does at the individual level for that moment allows you to determine that in a simple survey.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. So
yeah,
go ahead.
I think that that kind of hits home to me because one of the things that I think has been very helpful for me, being able to see the scores that come out from this method, is that if something really has a very high implicit score, we also know that's something that if you were going to try to change their mind about that association, that's going to be pretty difficult, and it might not be worth and expensive, right? If you're thinking about changing an ingredient in a product. But if people have a little bit more of a rational response about something, right? They're open to the, let me think about this. Maybe information can easier influence them in changing their mind about maybe something that you wanted to change. So it not only just kind of helping us understand what the reaction is, but also it helps us when we know this to understand how to communicate about a product, how to advertise a product, how to position it, and what we need to do to talk about these products to make them, the most appealing for people and help them understand the products better.
Yeah, great.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think once you understand like how much of the population is going to get, you're going to have to communicate educationally to how much you're going to have to put into, or that will just go along for the ride, right? Like they're already there, they're already believing they're your early adopters versus how many you have to pull in. Those things are really good. Also, just how much, when you put something out there that's more disruptive, it also gives you a chance to add right, like fuel to the fire through the
Mhm.
advocacy networks and everything as well.
All right, should we move on to
Yeah,
the next part here?
Sure, let's talk about the application. It seems like we're already just starting to get into
Starting
that,
to get
right?
into those, yeah.
So, yeah. So, like Mimi, you were just talking about this, right? Some of
Yeah.
your applications. So, tell us more. What else are you seeing as key applications?
Yeah, I think when we first started using this method, it was really at the height of when clean ingredients were becoming, something that we were paying a lot of attention to, especially when it comes to flavors, right? And people not wanting artificial flavors or artificial colors, but our world is the flavors. And really kind of almost some doom and gloom happening, like, oh my gosh, we're never going to have a business in the future because nobody wants to have a flavor on a label. But they do want things to taste good. So that doom is not really going to happen there. But primarily we started using this approach really to make sure that we had a really solid handle on understanding the associations of clean ingredients, which were clean, which weren't as clean. So from the ingredients themselves, but also the different ways. Sometimes you have options in the way that you label an ingredient in different products. Is it yes, it maybe we could label it as a you have natural flavors. Sometimes you can label things that it's a flavor extract or it's a flavor essence or, and when you change those words, it makes a difference. It makes a big difference. So, that's been a big application for us, and we continue, and we've built a very large database in our understanding around clean ingredients.
Right.
But probably my favorite application is a little bit different in that we've really done a lot of work just exploring what's going on in the area of indulgence, right? Indulgence has changed. You think about indulgence, it used to be like, oh, it's kind of this thing that, oh, will be bad, let's indulge, it's taboo, like not a good thing to do. But today, think about how much it's changed. Today, it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to indulge, I'm going to treat myself. It's self-care, right? It's really
Right.
changed. It's changed a lot. And so we've been doing a lot of work to understand, what are the ingredients that have higher implicit association with this whole concept of indulgence. And that has been really, really fascinating because we can look at different flavors, different textures. We can also look at, just different characteristics. Like, if you characterize something as comforting, is that how implicit is that to indulgence, or how implicit is something that has a unique taste experience? Is that connected to indulgence? And I think about, especially a few years ago, everything was, let's make it healthier indulgence. And that at first became like sugar-free chocolate and sugar-free candy and sugar-free. But guess what? Sugar-free has does not have a high association with
That's
indulgence.
right.
Kind of turns people off. Like, you're labeling that as sugar-free? I don't think so. I'm not expecting an indulgent experience from
That's
Yeah,
that.
right.
that is
So
definitely puts
that was
people
one.
into system two mindset.
That's
Like,
right.
Yeah.
really, I don't think so.
Yeah, yeah. But there's other ingredients that have more inherent association with indulgence that are healthier, have higher, healthier associations and indulgent associations. So let's figure out what those are. So we've done a lot of work in that area, and that's been kind of a pet
Yeah.
project of mine, where this methodology is really,
Hmm.
really given us a lot of insight.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
I like that. I like that extension into also the sensory characteristics of the product and the connections between, like, if you know you're going after indulgence, what kind of sensory characteristics,
Yes.
for what groups of people, because you have your, crunch is an indulgent thing for a group of people, but for other people, that's actually not indulgent at all. It's annoying.
Yeah.
So, you've got all
Yeah.
these different
And
groups of targetable
formats,
groups.
layered
Yeah, right.
things or filled things or enrobed things, like all those
Mm,
things you
Design.
can
Yeah.
test. Mhm.
Yeah.
So what about the idea of disruption versus nudging? Any applications there, Greg? I mean, if you want to.
Yeah, like we go to quite a bit of work in this space, because part of the challenge is a lot of like let's keep it on the indulgent track. If you take indulgence, people often have really strong behavioral habits around, I'm going to take this break on this day at this time to have this type of an indulgent. If you want to put a new product into that space, you cannot be disruptive as disruptive, right? Because you're changing something that's super ingrained in their process that is actually really beneficial for their mental health. And so to do that, you've got to pull in things that are great nudges that say, hey, this fits with what you're doing. This continues to improve your health in life, et cetera. Versus you may be looking for ways. There may be people looking to start these new habits, or you're maybe trying to find or create a new moment for people where this is now going to be a new behavior or a change in behavior, or you want to come in and disrupt something that you think I've found is really not that healthy of a habit, and you think if you can disrupt it, you can actually improve people's lives. Okay, great. Now you actually want to find things that are more system 2 oriented, that are much more disruptive to people, that if you get too disruptive, of course you just scare them away, but in that, what we call familiar with a twist, right? You get that level of disruption that helps them open up their mind to think about new options and potentially open up their minds to new products.
Yeah, so when you think about ingredients, okay, I think of the idea of a disruption versus maybe alienation. So if you are a brand fan, there may be certain ingredients that just don't fit with the brand. And
That's true.
yeah, and so this sort of way of testing whether people are system 1, that means it's a nudge. They're not disrupted, but it's an ingredient that they kind of, okay, that fits with what I would expect for something this brand would bring to market. But if it's something that is disruptive, it doesn't fit, that could be something that alienates brand fans even.
True. Well, and you bring in the point about brand, right? So certain, like you have naming conventions of certain ingredients, right? There's certain ways, like if you name that, it fits with your brand personality better. If you're trying to be, like the simple one I love to give is salt, right? If I'm trying to be a organic clean label product, I don't want to put NaCl on my ingredient statement, right? So that's going to push people away, and it's going to be disjoint with my brand image. So being able to bring brand into the equation, that's part of that context and moment setting, is a big opportunity here as well. Good application.
Yeah. Or sea salt versus salt.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Versus sea salt.
Versus sodium chloride.
Yes, there you go. That's the best
There you
one.
go.
That's right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Versus Himalayan salt. You can go on and on.
Yeah, exactly.
Keep going.
Exactly. So yeah. All right.
So all those things, there's a lot of great applications, and anytime there's a tool out there, it can be applied in a lot of different ways. But let's talk about how it's actually impacting business now. So if Mimi, you've been using this for many, many years. So what are some of the business impacts that you've seen at IFF?
Yeah, I think what we've seen, I guess, for one, is that it can help you be a little bit speedier when it comes to formulating and product development, because now, as we were saying, I mean, we've tested a lot of ingredients. We have a lot of information about a lot of different types of associations, whether it's healthy, indulgent, authenticity, clean. We have a lot of information, and so a lot of times when we get briefed by our customers, they have a very specific positioning, and when our developers, they can look at a whole range of, let's say, sweetener options that could be used to develop something. But if we understand what the positioning is, and we understand the associations that these ingredients inherently have, you have really kind of a nice starting place for product developers, a nice database of things that you can just search and say, okay, show me the indulgent ingredients that are highly implicit with indulgence or what have you. So I think that is big, because over time, that is a time saver, and it's also inspires people a bit. Maybe they hadn't thought of using a certain ingredient before. And so I think it can help us save time, but also maybe in some cases even spark a little new thinking, which is always a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. One of the other things I've seen has been one of my most favorite impacts on business is that a lot of business is really about making tough decisions. And when you're doing development, sometimes there's just no good ingredient to pick, right? To get what you want.
Yeah.
Like I need this indulgent product, but I also I'm struggling, like these ingredients, I don't have the magic ingredient to put into here, because if I really want the sensory property, I have to use this, and so you're faced with these difficult decisions. And if you can get that decision, if you can get data to help support that decision, either on, hey, here's some comparatives between ingredients that do the same thing, or when you're looking at that comparative, say, well, yeah, this one's better than this one, but how big of a risk am I taking from a market standpoint? Is it 5%, 10% more people have this opinion than this opinion? You start moving into that level of decision making. Now you've got much easier decisions to be able to make.
Yeah, and we've seen that even with things like, things that consumers don't really like to see in general, like emulsifiers, and some emulsifiers are, have worse associations than others, but what does it cost to change if you think that it's important to change? And like you said, it helps us do kind of this risk assessment, put some numbers behind that, and help people feel more confident about making the decision, but also for us selling the idea with data to back it up is also helpful.
That's good. That's good. That's true. Yeah.
That's one of the questions I have for you, Mimi, is about, since you've been, collecting a lot of data, tracking ingredients, and perhaps, on a global basis, as you're able to understand how are you seeing differences globally, or over time, where there's differences in an ingredient perception and behavioral tendencies?
Yeah, I mean, we have seen differences. Probably some of the biggest differences that we look at, a lot of them are, looking at North America versus Europe. And we see some clearly significant differences in ingredient perceptions there. And, especially I would say when it comes to what people think are more authentic ingredients, or things that might be good or worse for the environment. So there's some differences there, and that all affects, what people really think are clean, acceptable as clean ingredients. And then we have seen some shifts over time, especially, in the sweetener space, I would say. We look at that quite closely, and people, have heard new things and have different, so we're seeing some different trends going on in the perception of different sweeteners.
Right. So that really probably has business impact for you, for IFF, as well as probably important, more or less strategically, for larger food companies.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first and foremost, it helps us help our customers, which is what ingredient companies do. So we're always paying attention to that, but it also helps us when we're thinking about, our innovation and where we need to be looking, in terms of, what's next in certain ingredients, and what's our innovation pipeline look like, to kind of help us anticipate. So when you're able to have these great metrics to monitor these things, now you can start becoming clear about, oh, that means we need to be doing, this in terms of developing, being able to develop certain types of ingredients for the future.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
Good.
For sure.
Well, I thought what I would show to this point, this is a couple quick examples of ways. Once you can have this technique, you can capture literally hundreds of ingredients and to large groups of people very fast, because it's a survey research technique. And then you can warehouse that data. We put this into, for some of our clients, into multi-country databases, and this is a dashboard tool where you can just go in and say, okay, I'm interested in this category, interested in this country or countries, and then you can look at, okay, through implicit techniques, what are the benefits most important to that category that are driving choice, and you can rank them here. Weight management is listed really high here, and then you can click on the different desired benefits, and you can see what are the associated ingredients,
Yeah.
those that are nudgers and those that are disruptors. So fast yes or slow yes in terms of towards weight management or whatever you're looking at. So that's one sort of way. That another sort of slice is you can look at specific ingredients and look at something, a dashboard like this.
Benefits.
Yeah, as
benefits.
well as benefits. So it's just ways in which you can slice and dice. You have these tools with these large databases and values. So I don't know, Mimi, if you have any, because you obviously do this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a data nerd, so yeah, I mean, I love these dashboards, and
Right.
I love to make dashboards, and I more importantly want people to use the dashboards. And I think anytime you can do something like this to make this data visual and tell this visual story, it really helps. It's great to have these insights, right? We generate insights, but they're only great if people use them. And I think being able to create these visual dashboards like this is really a way that we can make sure that all this data and these insights are used. So I think it's pretty powerful to be able to have this.
Great.
Yeah.
Well,
it's good. It's good. Oh yeah, back to what we're
should we? Do you want to wrap up?
Back to where we started.
I'd love to. Yeah, I was gonna say, as we wrap up here, for everybody listening in audience, what are some of the challenges that you've got? I mean, when it comes to ingredients and the challenges that you have either with consumer perceptions or formulation issues and things like that, what are some of the challenges that you're facing? And think about those. Drop those into the Q&A. Drop those in the chat. If you have any other questions for us as well, continue to drop those in, and we'll get to those here as we finish up.
Yeah, we certainly live in interesting times. Where ingredient testing, having access to this type of information can really be valuable. And I don't know if we need to say much more about what's going on today, but maybe just get to Q&A at this point.
Well, yeah, absolutely. We can jump into Q&A, but I think one of the things I wanted to just kind of put into people's minds is that this is a fast shifting market. And if you're thinking to yourself, it's as easy as, like I said at the beginning, calcium and bones, they go together. Well, that's true. There are a lot of those base ones, but if somebody suddenly starts talking about, bad calcium sourced from this particular place and these bad for you places, all of a sudden that blows up on media. It shifts instantaneously. And so one of the things that you have to remember is that, this is a pretty volatile space, and it certainly appears that we're getting into more and more volatile times. I mean, we started there, what was it, 2017, when a lot of this misinformation bias, was starting to press and clean label was coming. Well, what's the next round, right? What's the next round? Clearly, we're going to have ultra processed as a topic that has been on the rise, and it's going to continue to be on the rise, certainly in the short run, and a lot of the negative minded conversations. So, how do we come into the world and change that to positive minded?
Yeah. I mean,
certainly more scrutiny on ingredients is coming, and that's crystal clear. Yeah.
Yeah, we're starting a lot more people. It used to be like, I remember when we first started, we were asking, well, what percentage of people even care, like look at ingredients on labels? And it was like 13% of the population in the US even looked. And then as we started looking at that globally, like there were some countries where it was like 60% of the people were looking at the ingredients every time they bought packages of food on the store shelf. And you're like, wow, that's such a different behavior. And now we're starting to see that with the ingredients in the news all the time. It's just the behavior is shifting and changing, and it's getting a lot more visibility.
Yep. Some of the highest watchers of ingredients and labels are in China, which really surprised me. But so maybe they have more concern to worry about. I don't know, with their food and food safety. What questions people have, about ingredients? What are I love to hear, so in this Q&A part coming up, what do you all that are watching this conversation that we've had today, what are some of the challenges you're facing or you're concerned about will be facing here in the future?
One of the topics that I see, I don't see it on the chat yet, but I know we had internally was the question on, when you're thinking about promoting products, there was like this idea of front of pack, back of pack, maybe you bury it on the Amazon feed, et cetera, so forth. How do you go about figuring out when is it of value to you to call out an ingredient? Like when is that going to be of value? So, and if so, country by country, obviously different regulations, but how do you go about figuring that part out? It was one of the topics that we were discussing yesterday. And I was thinking, okay, for us from the consumer vantage point, we're clearly looking at contextual situation context, what percent of the population even care about that ingredient, will believe that ingredient, et cetera, so forth. But I was trying to think about it more from, Mimi, from your standpoint, like when do you think is like, or when do you try to make advising principles of, hey, you should actually be like promoting an ingredient or promoting the absence of an ingredient? Like, when does that come about?
It comes about a lot in so many different situations, because again, I do think that, consumers are becoming so savvy, right? Have become so savvy, and they're learning all the time and being influenced all the time. And so with our customers, very often we're having conversations about which ingredients they might want to be talking more about, and maybe even calling out on their packages. So those conversations, I would say, what's interesting is they've definitely ramped up. Our customers want to hear more our point of view. What do we know about what consumers think about these different ingredients? So just in general, I would say, that people are wanting to talk about that more and pay a lot more attention to it than they did in the past. I can't really share any specific case study, but I think in general, it's definitely more top of mind. And they know that the consequences of talking about an ingredient that isn't well received are much larger than they used to be. So I just think in general, our customers, consumer product companies, need to understand even more about the perception of the ingredients in their products and want to know more.
Yeah, certainly. And I see, Lauren, you pointed out in the chat there that go in front of pack. You also have to consider all the other business component pieces, like the legal ramifications of how much you actually put in your product, whether you can actually claim it or not. So certainly when you talk about associations and claims, it's not a one size fits all, right? Sometimes you have to validate that with other types of data. Sometimes you have the legal hurdles that you have to overcome, or regulations you have to follow, maybe more appropriately put.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's simply associative. It's more like, I'm going to put this into marketing speak, a slogan, language, things that are not designed to be defensible by a certain area. So certainly those things, I think you do have to look at that whole picture. You can't just go in and go,
Yeah.
I'm going to run a quick implicit test and that'll be good enough for me.
Yeah.
It is the full send understanding of your product, not and your offering.
Yeah.
I'm curious on, I'm just going to name somebody's first name because I'm looking at who's here, but Alex, this is somebody that I know works a lot in product development space and food industry. What are you seeing? What are your comments, or do you have any comments or thoughts to add? Another one is for those of you that are on here that are working in non-food, okay?
True. Yeah.
And there's some non-food people that are joined us here today. What are the concerns that you're seeing with maybe excipients in for over OTC pharma products,
right? Or vitamins, supplements.
Yeah, or vitamins, supplements, things like that. What are the issues, and how are you trying to combat those or make better decisions? So,
and I will say we've seen a lot more interest or importance placed on, again, anything related to sustainability and ingredients that are responsibly produced and all those sorts of things. And sometimes people hear something about a type of ingredient that they start to have a really specific association with that may or may not be true, right? Because you can source ingredients in different ways, and so I think more and more we also have to be really cognizant of that, because it is becoming more important.
Yep.
That's a good point. Yeah, we were talking about that from the idea that just because you can put the word on the package doesn't mean that it means the same thing from the, not necessarily the associative meaning, but the sometimes just putting the ingredient on causes everybody to pause because it's in the news and they're like, oh, I wonder if, like, and then they go searching, right? So sometimes the ingredient itself is a disruptor just because it's in the news.
Right.
No.
Yeah, or the just the words in the claim. You can look at the different words in a claim and understand which ones are more deeply resonate with people, whether it's for sustainability or a health claim or something.
Yep. All right.
Well, I don't see any more questions from the team here. So if there's nothing else, thank you very much, Mimi, Dave. This has been a really fantastic conversation. I really appreciate having the time. If anybody else, if you want to keep this conversation going, or you have any other questions that you want to ask us on the side, certainly jump in. You can shoot us email. You can you can book a session, and we'll come together and have a conversation, especially if it's something you don't want to talk about publicly. That often we get into these things, and you want to be able to say, okay, hey, let's dig deep into a specific topic or a challenge we're having. Glad to have you. We've got a lot of good experts available for you to chat with.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. So
thanks, you guys.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.